top 11 US TV shows. The other week I did a video on my top 10 British shows, and now the time has come to do the predictable and obvious follow-up of my top 11 favorite shows from the other side of the pond. With honorable mentions to Friends, which I think is actually pretty underrated these days, new favorite Stranger Things, the late 90s early 2000s Dawson's Creek, which I also think is pretty underrated especially for a teen drama show, and excellent serial killer thriller show Dexter. And just one more moment to point out that, no, sadly, the 80s Little Vampire series, which I love enormously, will not be on this list because it was actually a Canadian-German co-production rather than American. Here are my current top 11 favorite US TV shows of all time. 11. The Star Trek franchise. Yes, I'm cheating massively here, but too bad. And to be honest, I don't like all of it. I haven't seen Star Trek Discovery, or STD as some wags have dubbed it, and what I have heard isn't overly encouraging. I'm not a fan of the original show, blasphemous as that might be, as I just find it far too dated, even though I do like the original cast in the films, and Voyager is a ginormous pile of shit that has the worst cast, with the sole exception of Robert Picardo, of any of the Trek shows I've ever seen. But I do like Next Gen, DS9 and Enterprise. I was a massive DS9 fan back in the day, while merely sort of tolerant of Next Generation, while these days, while I still like DS9, I don't love it quite as much as I did, while I've become more fond of Next Generation, especially since I splurged on the Blu-ray set, which does look fantastic. Enterprise I actually couldn't be arsed with back in the day, and only found it and binge-watched it all last year, and, actually, I think it's massively fucking underrated and really enjoyable. Miles better than some Trekkies would have you believe, to whom I can only say, invest the shat style, get a life. 10. Elementary. The only one on the list to currently still be airing new episodes, though for how much longer is anyone's guess. This is another one that I only discovered and binge-watched last year, and am already currently doing so again. I initially avoided it as I thought an American modern Sherlock Holmes show, and a female Watson to boot, what a pile of shit. But it's actually a really great, smart show. Johnny Lee Miller is now my second favorite Holmes after the peerless Jeremy Brett, and this is by far the superior modern take on Sherlock Holmes by a long fucking way. 9. Fringe. This sci-fi thriller show ran for 5 seasons in the late 2000s and early 2010s and probably went on one season too long, something that will be something of a recurring theme in this list. This show has a great cast, and I always liked Joshua Jackson back from his days from kicking ass and stealing the hot chick from the clearly gay and massively in denial lead character on Dawson's, and the mythology storyline is also pretty ace. The 5th season is shit, but the good news is that the main plot is really wrapped up, and pretty satisfactorily all round, in the excellent 4th season, so fuck it. 8. Babylon 5. It's looking a bit long in the tooth today, but I remain very fond of this perennial 90s sci-fi favorite. B5 certainly had its problems, and again comes with a generally disappointing 5th season, but this was a seriously bold stab at telling an epic science fiction tale with a beginning, middle and end on a pretty low budget on TV. It still has a massive cult following, and it earned it. 7. The X-Files. The seminal science fiction horror show of the 90s, The X-Files played a huge part in defining that decade, which remains the golden age of US television in my opinion. The X-Files has fallen a little on this list of late, with the early shows now looking a bit dated and the recent revival seasons being a colossal fucking misfire of epic proportions that I would really rather pretend never happened. And I mean, I already pretended that the show ended at season 8 rather than the completely pointless and perfunctory season 9 to start with. But it's still a classic and iconic show. 6. Soap. This late 70s and early 80s comedy, a primetime spoof of the daily soap opera genre, was massively irreverent and massively controversial in its day, something I always find terribly amusing given I watched it on reruns at like 8 years old or something, and neither my nor my parents ever so much as raised an eyebrow at it for its supposedly edgy material. A fantastic ensemble cast, brilliantly and increasingly invented storylines such as Bert being abducted by aliens and replaced with a sex-mad alien doppelganger, and Corinne's baby literally getting possessed by the devil. Soap kind of collapsed in its fourth and final season, which was, incredibly obviously, under different showrunners than the first three. I absolutely fucking adored this show as a kid, and it did much to form my love for absurdist and politically incorrect comedy, and I still love it today. 5. Seinfeld. One of the most famous and best comedy series of the 90s, and of all time, Seinfeld was famously a show about nothing, or rather about the misadventures of a massively dysfunctional group of friends who made bad behavior seriously funny in a manner arguably hitherto unheard of on American TV. The show ran for 9 seasons and, impressively, while arguably weakening slightly toward the end, never actually jumped the shark. Now that's not nothing. 4. That 70s show. Possibly the last, as of time of writing, great American comedy series. That 70s show ran for 8 seasons, which was at least 1 season too many. Who the fuck thought carrying the series on without Ashton Kutcher and especially Topher Grace, you know, the central fucking character, was a good idea? Needs taking out and shooting, as to the new and utterly clueless showrunners on that dire final season. But for the most part this 70s set nostalgia-based youth-oriented comedy series is an absolute blast of good-natured, feel-good and often genuinely hilarious comedy fun. And you know what? For all the show is centered on its teenage characters, my absolute favorite character is actually Kurtwood Smith as the legendary Red Foreman, whose dire warning of being about to put his foot in various morons' asses provided me with a role model to die for as I become a grumpy crotchety old fuck myself. 3. Newsradio. This mid to late 90s comedy series ran for 5 seasons, and again sadly 1 season too long. The last season was kind of torpedoed not just by a change of showrunner, which is often the death knell for such shows, but also by the tragic loss of one of its central actors, the legendary Phil Hartman, who played one of the show's greatest characters as the magnificently deranged blowhard Bill McNeil. But, and I cannot stress this enough, I cannot recommend the first 4 seasons highly enough. It may well be not just one of the most underrated comedy series of all time, but possibly the absolute best, because at its peak it was absolutely gut-bustingly hilarious with a great ensemble cast including the awesome Dave Foley and the gorgeous Maura Tierney. Newsradio still has a strong cult following, but deserves to be seen and appreciated more. 2. Person of Interest. This awesome science fiction action thriller show ran for 5 seasons and, in my humble opinion, is easily the best TV show, American or otherwise, of the 2010s. Person of Interest starts out as a kind of quantum leap on speed, as a reclusive billionaire computer genius and a ruthless ex-government agent use high-tech technology to find and help ordinary people whose lives are about to become seriously endangered. But as its paranoid surveillance state and artificial intelligence plot MacGuffin began to deepen in pervasiveness in the background, ultimately ends up as an epic battle against a malevolent all-seeing AI with the future of humanity itself at stake. This show is fucking awesome. If you haven't seen it, as is so easy for great shows to fall through the cracks in these fragmented times, all I can say is rectify that fucking situation fucking now. 1. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. My favorite American TV show of all time, and my second favorite television series from anywhere ever behind only the original 20th century version of British sci-fi show Doctor Who. Buffy took a ridiculous premise that had already been ham-fistedly made as a pretty shite movie and turned it into an epic fantasy series that traversed comedy, romance, heartbreak, epic action scenes and thrills and genuine horror that rarely put a foot wrong over 7 incredible seasons. I fucking love this show, but no, I don't want it revived, and I don't want it rebooted either. Just think of something new and leave this fucking American masterpiece alone, okay? So there you have it. My top 11 US TV shows of all time. Like it, love it, or hate it, that's what they are.